Hi, I'm Christina, and this is a book review of The End of Men by Christina Sweeney-Baird. So this is a science fiction novel and it was published in 2021. This is a post-apocalyptic novel about a virus. This virus kills only men. All women are immune to it, and the mortality rate is incredibly high. 9 out of 10 men will die. So this story really focuses on what would happen when half of the population of the world die very suddenly in a matter of days and weeks once this virus has begun to spread. And we see this story told through many different perspectives. We will hear the story from at least 15 or 16 different perspectives. And I have to say, I thought the scope of that was absolutely wonderful. I don't think I've ever read a story where there has been so many different perspectives and they've all been handled very well and balanced very well. So obviously we don't spend the same amount of time with all of those 15, 16 perspectives because I don't know how we would manage a book like that. So we do spend more time with a few main characters, and then we spend some time occasionally throughout the story with some of the other perspectives. So I think the main 3 characters are 3 women named Catherine, Amanda and Dawn. So the first perspective that we meet is Catherine, and we meet Catherine 5 days before the start of the virus. And I really liked that we started prior to the outbreak of the virus. I thought that was done really well, just to see a sense of normality with our first main character. She is a social anthropologist, she has a husband, and she has a young son who is 3 years old called Theodore, and they are currently trying to have a second baby. So we're just seeing normal people's lives, and I thought that was really good that that was included. We didn't just go straight into the outbreak. We had a little bit of time just settling into one of the characters, and I really appreciated that. I thought that was done really, really well. And then one of the next main perspectives is a woman called Amanda. So Amanda is an A&E doctor, and she has a husband who is an oncologist, and she has 2 teenage sons. So she is basically the person who discovers the virus, and she's the one who is trying to alert the world to the fact a pandemic is happening in her hospital. So she's the person who sees the death of patient 0, and she quickly identifies that lots more people have become very unwell, and she is the one that is the driving force behind trying to get people to listen to her higher up about the pandemic. And our third main character is called Dawn. She is 59 years old and she works for the British Intelligence Services. Now, she was very close to retirement prior to the start of the pandemic, and then obviously all her plans have to change. So I thought this book was just absolutely excellent. I thought the scope was really, really good, and it really hit me hard a lot of the time, I have to say. I thought it was absolutely excellent, and I gave it 5 stars. So the majority of the perspectives are told from women. I think about 13 or 14 of the perspectives are women, but we do have 3 perspectives from men. So I'll just quickly mention those. So one of the first perspectives from a man is from a man who is stranded on a cruise ship somewhere off the coast of Iceland. So unfortunately, they happened to be on this cruise ship as the pandemic hit, and the captain decided that they aren't going to go back anywhere, so they're just going to wait for rescue. And once they've run out of fuel, they just put the anchor down, and they're just kind of waiting and hoping for somebody to come to them and provide provisions and rescue them. And then one of the other perspectives we have is from a boy, and he's a boy who lives in the Scottish Highlands with his parents in quite a remote part of the country, and he's isolating from everyone essentially. He's living alone in a very small part on their land, and the reason for that is there's been an evacuation program of boys out of the city centres, much like with the war, and it makes a lot of sense. And his parents have a lot of land, so in this program they are given lots and lots of boys to look after for the duration of the pandemic until a vaccine can be found and they know they can reunite them with their families. So that was also a very interesting perspective. I thought both of those perspectives were really interesting. And then the other perspective of a man, it's not a good one. It's kind of a men's activist group who have decided that this virus is something that all women have created in order to overthrow the patriarchy. But it was a really interesting perspective to include, because obviously a very, very, very small percent of people might kind of agree with that kind of conspiracy theory. So I thought it was really interesting that she chose to include that, because it definitely would be out there on the internet, let's be honest. So yes, I thought that was good. I think I would like to have seen more perspectives from men, to be honest, as it is obviously a virus that is affecting men. But I do appreciate how, if we're going to have 9 out of 10 of those characters dying, I'm not sure how much you would gain from having too many perspectives by men, because how much, you know, pain and death would you really want to put in your story when you're trying to connect people to these characters, and then to say, oh yeah, 9 out of 10 of those are going to die? I don't think that would have worked. So I do understand why she's focused on showing women and women's perspectives. And of course, it's going to be women who inherit the earth essentially and have to live with the after effects of what has happened after this pandemic. And I thought the questions that she asked and answered about that were really, really interesting. So one of the first interesting questions that this story asks is, what are countries going to do when 50% of their workforce is either dead or is dying and is going to die most probably very soon? And obviously this will affect every single area of society, but there are certain sectors that it will impact more than others. There are obviously certain sectors that there are a lot more men working in that field than women. And those ones are obviously the armed forces, the police, doctors, construction. And you really have to ask the question as, how are you actually even going to keep your country running at a time like this? Most of the men are obviously dying, and then most of the women out there are grieving for their husbands, their children, their fathers, their brothers. There's so much obviously death and grief, but you have to also ask the questions. Well, Dawn has to ask the questions in the British intelligence services. How are we going to keep our workforce going? How are we going to keep the country running? I thought it was interesting, all of these questions that she did try to answer. Obviously, some countries would be a lot more hard on these kind of situations than others. I think it was interesting that in here she looks at how China has a civil war and the country is broken up into small factions, and I think lots of other countries would probably follow a similar path. And she's interesting that she's included it for just one country. I think it would probably affect other countries too, but I understand that she just wants to shine a light on one to be interesting. And I think also would be a lot more violence and panic and riots and murder and rape, and I think a lot of that would happen too, but not so much in the countries that she's probably chosen to follow. She does say that there are certain countries that have kind of been in a blackout since the pandemic. Certain countries in the Middle East, and with North Korea, no one has actually heard anything from them since the pandemic, and I thought that was very interesting to include too. And I think she mainly focuses on the UK and America, I would say. So the pandemic actually originates in Scotland, in Glasgow, which is where Amanda, our A&E doctor, works. And then it quickly spreads from Scotland to the UK, the rest of the UK, and then it moves outwards, obviously, as much like COVID-19 did. So I thought it was really interesting how she kind of focused on the UK and on Scotland, and she is a Scottish author, but I think most post-apocalyptic novels kind of focus more in America, so I thought that was very interesting. So yeah, most of the story is kind of centralised in Glasgow and then London and the Scottish Highlands, and then but we do kind of see other scopes too. So she has a little bit of time in Toronto in Canada, she does a little bit in New Zealand, she does San Francisco, she does Singapore, she does Moscow in Russia, she obviously does off the coast of Iceland, and she has an unnamed military base for the US as well. So she looks at lots of different places, and I did like that, but I did also like how we've kind of focused down to a narrower kind of look at a certain amount of characters, because I think if she would have tried to do characters all over the world, in all of these different countries, I think it would have been very difficult to connect to the characters, and I don't think you would have had that kind of emotional connection to them. So I really enjoyed the scope that she had so many different perspectives, but I also enjoyed the fact that we really focused on maybe 3 or 4 kind of main people, because I do think it was so much harder hitting with those 3 main characters. I really did kind of have an emotional connection towards them, and with some of the characters who we didn't spend very much time with, I didn't really have an emotional connection to them, obviously, but it was great to hear from their perspectives too. So yeah, I thought it answered lots of very interesting questions. She also tried to say, obviously we're going to try and fix the problem of work, and an immediate thing, a lot of that was to kind of give people a job, in a sense that it's not just going to be, oh, what do you fancy doing now? It's going to be, well, kind of like a conscription idea, that you're going to be assigned a career because it's something, you know, that the society is going to need. So unless you work in an essential area, so if you're working obviously in the health service, if you're working in the police or the law, or if you're an engineer, I don't think they're going to change what job you do, because they would deem you to be essential. But if you're going to be working somewhere, like I think she mentioned estate agents, because who will be buying a house in a situation like this? And so many houses would probably be left unoccupied. So yes, there'll be certain areas of society that would just cease to exist. So all of those people are essentially open to work. So that was very interesting how she did that. And I also liked how she looked at kind of an evacuation program for in Scotland for boys, because I thought that would make a lot of sense. Try and move your boys away from the source of the virus and move them into more rural areas to protect them. So another interesting question she raised is what would happen to the people who are pregnant prior to the start of the pandemic. Obviously those who know they are going to give birth to girls know that their baby will be safe, but those that know they're going to give birth to a boy, once the child is born, you've got a 90% chance that the child will die very, very quickly, and all women are carriers of this, and there was no way for them to control the spread of the virus. So I thought it was interesting that she tried to tackle that question, and I think she chose New Zealand as a country who had decided in this story to take all baby boys away from their mothers as soon as they are born, and put them in isolation essentially. They'll have all of these boys, very, very young boys, locked away, and everyone who visits them will be in a hazmat suit, and that's for their protection too. So yeah, I thought she had some really interesting ideas that she looked at. She also looks at how this pandemic would affect the LGBT community. Now, she doesn't actually have a perspective from a character that does fall within this demographic, and I do think that is a shame. I think that really would have added to the reading experience. It would have just added to our cast of characters as a whole, but she definitely does try and ask and answer some of these interesting questions about how that would affect so many people. And I do think she tries to think about that in a very careful, thoughtful, interesting way, and she definitely has interesting ideas on that. I think in general, there definitely could have been more diversity in this story. Most of the characters are women, most of the characters are white, most of the characters are women in their 30s and 40s, most of them are middle class. Relatively high-powered jobs, with most of them have children as well. So there definitely could have been more diversity there. We have only one black character, who is Dawn, our British Intelligence Services agent in MI5, and we have a character who's from the Philippines, but the vast majority of characters are white in this story, and the vast majority are in their kind of 30s and 40s. So I think, again, Dawn is 59, so she's slightly older, which is good, but we don't really have anyone older than that. I think Dawn is the eldest character in this story, and I think it would have been interesting to see how this would affect the older community as well. So there's no one's in their 60s, 70s, 80s. That would have been a very interesting perspective. We could have had a look at how this pandemic is hitting, the older community, hitting retirement homes. That would have been very interesting. And then maybe in the social services in the care system, that could have been interesting. Similarly, there's not really anyone younger than 30. So we do have the one boy who's living alone in the Scottish Highlands in his parents' land, but apart from that, I don't think we have anyone else who's younger than about 30-ish. I thought this story was just absolutely wonderful. I thought she really asked and answered so many interesting questions about this. It's probably one of the best virus novels that I have ever read, and I've read quite a few and I've seen quite a lot of virus movies, as it was one of my kind of favourite genres in science fiction, kind of prior to COVID. And I did think it was done incredibly well, and the scope as well. So she starts 5 days before the start of the pandemic, and I think she ends like almost 2,000 days later. Where are we? Day 1976, so almost like just over 5 years later. And also the whole kind of the social anthologist woman who's trying to put together a report and ask questions of normal people, had the little forward to her report is at the very end of the story too. So yeah, I thought it was excellent. I obviously had some criticisms, because you can't have a perfect book, it obviously doesn't exist, but I thought this was just absolutely excellent overall. I thought it dealt with some really interesting questions, and I was very much connected to these characters, the main three characters especially, very much rooting for them. There was obviously a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of death in this story. I thought she handled it all really well, and it definitely is a very hard-hitting book, and I think it was just very well executed and brilliant. Honestly, I would definitely recommend that you read this. It's a definite 5-star read for me, and it's definitely one of the best science fiction books that I've read this year, and as I just said, I think it's one of the best kind of virus science fiction books that I've ever read. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. So thank you so much for watching. Please do like the video if you've liked it, and please do subscribe if you'd like to see more of me talking about books. If you have any thoughts on this book, I would love to know what you thought of it down in the comments below. And if you're now interested in reading it, definitely let me know that too. All right, bye.